Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Ulasht, the Hate Seed tokens. This deck comes to us from DM Dingo, who says that they would like it optimized. And ideally, they would like different versions of the deck or different tiers for different power levels. And their main concern or restrictions in deck building is they want to keep it on theme, keep it about Ulasht. I have no problem with either of these things. Um, when it comes to different versions of the deck, I'll have to an extent, leave it to you. I'll give you the suggestions to make this version of the deck a little more consistent and optimized, but not necessarily more powerful. I will leave that to you to decide if you want to make another version later that is stronger. But for now, we are just looking for consistency and success. As always, this deck list will be in the video description below, and I highly recommend you go ahead and take a look at it before or during watching this video. This is a really good deck. I like Ulasht. Ulasht was kind of a commander that's, showed up and disappeared. People were trying it and then, got overtaken by a lot of other +1/+1 counter, decks or infinite combo decks, or just gave Guru of Spores in general. But I think adding red and having a really unique mechanic that this Hydra has, which I'll describe it in a second, is just a really interesting kind of commander and really fun to play around. So, who is Ulasht and why are we using them as our token commander? Where Ulasht is a 4-mana Hellion Hydra, even though I'm not quite sure it looks like a plant creature to me, but is not. Ulasht is 0/0, but enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each red creature you control and a +1/+1 counter for each green creature you control. Which other, of course, it doesn't count itself. So what's important to consider is red and green creatures. That single red and green creature will give two +1/+1 counters to Ulasht. Then Ulasht has an activated ability for 1 mana. You can remove a +1/+1 counter from Ulasht to either deal 1 damage to target creature or to create a 1/1 green sapperling token. We grow the Hydra and then we take its power and spread it around, either through the red side with damage or the green side with growth of sapperlings. Nice and easy. So this deck was kind of built with this ability in mind, and so we're going to try to find a way to make the most of this ability, and especially the second one, which is creating sapperlings, but at the same time, we do want a rather big Ulasht and use it as a commander for this token deck. So before we get any further, let's check out the curve. The curve is pretty nice. I have little to no problems with it. I believe we have 2 7-mana permanents, but we will get to those. And our 12-mana permanent is Galta, which is obviously not actually 12 mana, but you subtract the greatest power of creatures around before you play this. So the first thing I do notice about this deck, looking through it, is interestingly, as our deck builder asked me to stay on theme, it seems to me we have quite a few cards that aren't necessarily on theme themselves. And as Galta is on screen, I think that's a really good place to start. Galta is primarily in a power matters deck, a deck that has absurdly large creatures consistently and therefore costs 2 mana or relatively low mana that you don't feel bad about having a 12 drop in your deck. However, this deck isn't actually that consistent at creating creatures of that power. Like, for example, Ulasht can come out with a lot of counters as long as you have a vast army, but the rest of the army kind of caps out around 5 or 6 power. I think a few of them can grow like Omnath, but once again is kind of consisting on whether or not you have the right cards in play. The other thing that I notice while we're on Omnath is this ability of Omnath also kind of sticks out. Omnath is, an interesting commander, but often not something we throw. And by Omnath, I mean OG Omnath Locus of Mana. It's not a creature we usually just throw into any multicolor deck that has green, even at 2 colors, because Omnath really only powers up the green side of it. You have to start spending all your mana into green and holding up your red mana so you can cast spells on it. And Leyline Tyrant, smartly enough, is put in here as the opposite of Omnath. But I don't think this alleviates the problem. I think it only just kind of exasperates this. These two creatures just don't really seem to belong here. You don't have very, very, you know, complicated, mana costs where you need to hold up tons and tons of mana, right? There are situations that I'll admit that you'll benefit from having a bunch of extra mana, especially with Ulasht coming out and then being able to immediately use the activated ability to spread out all his tokens into creatures. That being said, though, is it really going to be needed that much that we have Omnath and Leyline Tyrant out? And having a horde of unspent mana just lingering in your mana pool. Something that's, somewhat an obvious problem with these cards, but always bears repeating, especially with Omnath, is should Omnath be destroyed, you do lose all the mana you've been banking turn after turn, which is particularly worrisome. Whereas at least Leyline Tyrant, when it dies, gives you an out to spend all of the red mana you've been hoarding, much like a dragon. However, I am suspicious because it does say dies and not leaves the battlefield. So when your opponent, swords to plowshares are passed to exile. I'm mixing up these two spells, but once they exile your Leyline Tyrant, you still lose that red mana with no big, ability to immediately use it unless you have Ulashed out. For that reason, I'm also not too big on these two cards. I feel like Leyline Tyrant is the better of the two, so if you want to keep that ability, I would probably keep that one. Um, Chancellor The Forge also stands out as a little strange. Its main power is that you can reveal it from your hand and get a free creature. But that being said, you know what? I'm rereading its second ability, and I'm going to say that's fine. No, the fact that it's going to double all of your creatures into goblins is pretty good. Okay, no complaints. Sorry, I was putting too much into Chancellor the Forge's first ability, and I forgot how powerful its second ability is with this deck, so that's perfectly fine. Uh, Hellkite Tyrant feels a little out of place. We have some means of creating artifacts, but not what I would consider an overabundance. And depending on, who's around, if you're playing against an artifact deck, this can be incredibly powerful. And if you're not, this can just be mid. I'm I'm a little suspicious of it, but it's not a completely unheard of choice. It's still a very strong card by itself, so I'm not going to push too much on it. Looking at our other cards, I generally like our sorceries. I will have some additions. Crimson Wisps seems a little suspect as a haste enabler. Maybe you're using it just to cycle. I don't think you should. If you're using this to haste one of your creatures, I think something like Lightning Greaves, which is the classic pair of boots that you can put onto your Hydra, you're just going to have more success with that generally, um, even though it is a very cool looking card. Likewise, Metamorphos also feels just a little strange here. This is a card, this is also just another cycler in the sense that it replaces itself. You pay 2 mana, it gives you 2 mana. You're using a card and it gives you a card. It just replaces itself with the next card. And it's commonly used in like storm decks or other decks that need a critical mass of spells being cast. And you want a critical mass of tokens or creatures on board, which this doesn't particularly help. So this feels like it's just in there as a cycler or a mana fixer. And I think your mana is fine. And I don't think you need a cycler. So I think this is a card we can definitely take out with little cost. All right, then I want to really quickly look There was a few things I noticed here. Hex Pinnacle is a really fun card. Um, there are situations where you can make this happen, and I'm going to try to make it happen more with a few inclusions. But overall, I don't know if this is going to be a particularly powerful card. It does obviously combo very well with cards like Omnath, Locust of Mana, and Leyline Tyrant, the cards that I immediately, first thing told you that were probably not good enough for the deck. Um, so if you're taking those cards out, I think Helix Pinnacle also has to go. Even then, even if you keep them, I just don't feel like this is the theme of the deck. Don't get me wrong, I see the power of it with Primal Vigor and Doubling Season, where you can put counters on it incredibly quickly. I guess one of my concerns is when you play this, it has to make it to your next upkeep. And the Shroud isn't as powerful as you think. People do play, farewell effects, other like enchantment or artifact board clearing effects. Not super commonly, but commonly enough that if you play this early, your opponents will start planning their game plan around it. Because if they are able to defeat you in a timely fashion and you are able to play Omnath or a token doubler, they're going to get suspicious and they're going to start building towards stopping Helix Pinnacle because it's kind of a threat. And you don't have really the means to protect it. You don't have tutors to get the pieces you might be missing to make this to make enough mana to do it really quickly. So I think most of the time you're going to just feel like it doesn't do much. I could be wrong about that, but and frankly, it's a really, really cool card. When I started Magic, this was one of those cards that I went, "Oh, this is so awesome." But I think outside of dedicated like a super high level ramp deck where you're just ramping incredibly fast and threatening infinite mana really quickly, Helix Pinnacle doesn't really do the job as well as we'd like. Then, very briefly, looking at artifacts before we go into my suggestions. Ring of Three Wishes is an absurd amount of mana to do what it wants. I feel like if you want this effect, you know, um, Worldly Tutor, there's a number of like mono green creature tutors that I think you will have the same kind of success with. Now, if you're trying to use this to grab your enchantments, that's rough. That's kind of outside of your means in this deck in these colors, but I don't think the Ring of Three Wishes is the where you want to be. 10 mana to be able to, tutor one card in a deck that, yes, makes mana, but doesn't make enough mana to get away with it, I think is a bit tricky. Once again, I see the kind of perk of its ability to get extra counters when it comes into play, so you have more than just three wishes. That's neat. But even then, I don't think you're producing enough mana to be able to do this repeatedly. Adding a little bit to your mana is one of the things I'm going to suggest. But even then, I think this is too much. Monster Manual slash Zoological Study. This also sticks out at me as a card that seems like a bit of a strange inclusion because you're really low on creatures. Notice that both effects need you to have creatures. The sorcery side of it mills 5 cards, then reveals a creature milled this way to hand, which I don't think you have any way to take advantage of the milling, of the self mill, and I don't think you have enough creatures that the likelihood of milling one or more creatures is very, very high. So that part I already don't like. Now, the second half, the main part of Monster Manual, I imagine is the main reason you're playing it, the Elvish Piper style effect, where you just put a creature from hand onto the battlefield. And once again, we're just kind of low on creatures. You just really have a low creature count. And outside of Galta and Avenger of Zendikar and Chancellor of the Forge, kind of high mana, but not ridiculously high mana. I don't think you're going to be able to cheat a lot of creatures in, and most of the time you're going to be cheating in a creature that you probably could have cast anyways. So it kind of catches my eye as not being particularly the strongest card to include. Looking once again, the last two, Skyclave Relic and Replicating Ring, are both cards that I think we could just do a little better in terms of mana cost to ability, and we're going to suggest some mana rocks, some cards to kind of replace them so that you're just a little lower to the ground. You have a 4 mana commander, and generally I like putting out these 4 mana commanders, as soon as possible. But Ulash doesn't really work like that, right? We want Ulash to come out kind of as our finisher. We establish our board, we establish a token doubler or two, which would be really nice, and we have a bunch of creatures, and we drop Ulasht, and all of a sudden, we have a giant Hydra Hellion, we have a lot of things we can do, and we're moving forward. So taking turns off for 3 mana to be able to tap for 1 color feels a little too slow for the deck's kind of plan. Every turn matters. And when your cards aren't also creatures to trigger Ulasht, it kind of puts us a little far behind. Like we're not really going towards our theme here. Okay, those are the things I noticed that stood out. I will take a second. There are some, I think I kind of pointed out the cards I think were weaker, but there's a lot of cards here I particularly like. Like I do really like this deck, but All Would Be One really stands out to me as a fantastic inclusion. I really, really think this is like one of those cards that makes the deck work. To the point that like maybe maybe we should suggest Gamble. Gamble's not too much right now. Gamble is the red tutor, is the only tutor that you can really have access to grab enchantments, I'm pretty sure. Um, and Gamble is an affordable tutor. It's a fun tutor because you are always have a chance of discarding the card you've got. But I think it would be just worth playing because honestly, the power level of your cards, especially your enchantments from Parallel Lives, Doubling Season, Primal Vigor, all of these cards, and especially All Will Be One, these cards are really, really good and will single-handedly like win you the game. So having one copy of Gamble that represents any one of those, I think is definitely worthwhile. Even if it's kind of a clunky card sometimes, I think it's worth it. All right. So, what are my suggestions? Well, let's get the boring ones out of the way. Talisman Impulse, Rampant Growth, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits. These are all cards that will ramp you into your colors for 2 mana. Now, if you wanted to go further than this, I would suggest that we play 1 mana creatures, Land of War Elves, Birds of Paradise, anything that's a 1 mana creature that taps for mana that is a green or a red card, mainly because we absolutely want the mana, and Ulasht will come into play, see these creatures, and come in with more tokens. That being said, one of the things is that our deck is already extremely vulnerable to board clears, especially small board clears. I recognize we are playing, where are we? Wrap in Vigor, there it is. I just didn't recognize the name. Wrap in Vigor as a way to kind of protect ourselves, which I think is a very good decision, because in these colors we don't tend to have, a lot of protection. Here, Heroic Intervention is the other one, but obviously it is a very expensive card. So we only have so much protection we can have. So making our mana also vulnerable to board clears, I think it's a bit too vulnerable for a deck like this. So I'd rather play the Rampant Growths first, have these abilities that will put the lands into play directly, improve our mana, improve our ramp, make it so we can hit those 7 drops of Avenger of Zendikar and Chancellor of the Forge much earlier because both of those are some of our strongest spells, and fix our mana, keep the mana consistent, and I think it'll be just a little bit of an improvement there. And after you add these cards, if you are still feeling like you would like a little more mana, at that point I would start looking into the Land of War Elves and Arbor Elves and the like, the 1 mana dorks that will power up our commander Ulasht by just having them come in with more counters, but also generally just ramp your deck a little further. But I will leave how far you want to go into that to you. The next few cards I want to suggest are a little more specifically on theme with token production. So I was looking at this lady here, And I'm not suggesting we get rid of her because I really like her last ability, but Pashiri, Ovia Pashiri, she creates colorless creature tokens. And that's a bit of a problem, right? We want our tokens to come in red or green. Once again, I'm not going to suggest getting rid of her because her 5 mana basically turns all of your creatures into one big creature, and I do really like that because it enables you to go tall and wide at the same like you go wide first and then you can go tall. I really like that. It kind of works in the same way our commander does, so I really do like her here. But it did put me on the mindset of like just like bootlegger's stash that doesn't create creatures but it's also colorless, and awakening zone that creates creatures but they are colorless. I wanted to add a few more cards that will create colored creatures, so specifically red and green creatures, so that Ulasht can see them when they come in. So nice easy one. Scoot Swarm, a nice favorite that people really like. These aren't in particular order. I think these are all fine. Scoot Swarm, every time you play a land, you make an insect, and if you have enough lands, instead you make a copy of this card. So you get to a point where you are exponentially increasing, at least doubling, if not, yeah, doubling, right? Yeah, so I guess that's not exponential. You are doubling your collection of insects every time you play a land once you have enough. And that is going to be a massive boon for Ulasht, because then when Ulasht comes in and sees all these tokens, Ulasht is going to come in and be very, very strong. Another one that's kind of just fun, as long as we're thinking about mana, and we are going to come back to mana at the end, but Ant Queen is just a fun mana sink. To an extent, our commander is our main mana sink, but much like our green legendary lady I just talked about, it's nice to have some redundancy, and Ant Queen acts as a bit of redundancy because you can just pump mana into her and just start getting creatures. The downside is it costs double, as opposed to 1 mana, it costs 2, and one of it's green. That's kind of prohibitive. But on the other side, unlike Ulasht, um, you don't have another cost. You can literally do this as long as you have mana. So maybe I'm not going to put this very high on the list of cards to try out, but I think it's worth thinking about. Gives a bit of consistency in the deck when you feel that your commander has been hated out of the game. All right, something a little more straightforward and strong. Uh, Phylath. Phylath is much like our Scoot Swarm. My goodness, Scoot Swarm. Phylath is a landfall creature, but we're not really going to use it as its landfall effect. We're going to use it as a second copy of Avenger of Zendikar, for that when it comes into play, you count your basic lands and you get a 0/1 for each of them. Now, it is basic land, so there is a bit of limitation, but it does represent at least coming in with maybe 4 to 5, 3 to 4 0/1s, which I think is respectable. And the fact that it can turn any of those into a threat just by playing more lands is really, really nice. I think this is a nice free kind of card you can play. I would say this could really easily replace Hellkite Tyrant at the same mana cost while being much more on theme for what your commander wants to do. Here's another one that I'm not going to value too highly, but it is rather fun. Fresh Meat. Fresh Meat is kind of an undervalued card, I would say, because it's kind of very difficult to use. Because traditionally, what this does is it turns tokens. How do I put this? This isn't a card you play after a board clear. Usually, it's more of a card that when you proactively have a bunch of tokens and a way to sacrifice them, this card turns those tokens into 3/3s, which is really, really good because it allows you to sacrifice them again. You have another bunch of creatures to sacrifice, but also going from sapperlings or plants into beasts that are 3/3 is pretty good. And in a pinch, you can just hold this up when you know a board clear is coming. I think most of the time at a general level of play, if you get too far ahead, you can kind of sense a board clear is coming, sure, but your opponents will start talking about it. You'll notice they'll stop when your opponents stop playing as many creatures to the board, and you're just overtaking them, you can take a pause from developing your board, hold up fresh meat, you know, maybe play a few smaller creatures and consistently keep attacking them until they force the question and board clear, and then end of turn you fresh meat, basically getting an entire army back, so that on your next turn you can attack again. I do like this card. I think it's a tricky play, but I think it's definitely worth playing it. I've kind of convinced myself into it explaining it, so I think this is definitely worth playing. After that, we have another thing that we can do while holding up the mana, Sproutstorm. Sproutstorm is a particularly fun card. I think people were just talking about this card recently. Whenever I see this card, I'm just really happy. If you aren't familiar with this card, this is a 5 mana create a 1/1 creature card, and then return this card to your hand, except for you use all of your tokens and your creatures to pay for it. So what it actually says is for every 5 creatures you have on your last opponent's end step before your turn, you get a 1/1. And if you're able to get a 5th creature through Sproutstorm, if you have 9 creatures, you tap 5, cast Sproutstorm, put it back in your hand, and now you have 10 creatures because of the Sapperling, you get to do it again. It is a really, really fun card that gains a lot of power as you get a bigger and bigger army. But also, at worst, if you're holding up mana, like you have fresh meat up, or you have some defensive spells up, having the ability to just tap into Sproutstorm to just create a few tokens here and there is really beneficial. It is a way for you to be kind of up cards and up on your strategy without feeling like you're overcommitting or being too far behind. A lot of the a lot of the instants or sorcery spells, I should say, that simply create tokens often aren't very good, right? Like there's a Sapperling Migration, I believe. I could be wrong, but it's like 1 and a green, make 2 1/1s, and then for 6 you make like 4 1/1 Sapperlings. And that's kind of a card that feels really bad to play in Commander because 2 mana for 2 1/1s isn't great. And, they're very vulnerable to board clears. They're very vulnerable to attacks. They can't really do much most of the time. And when you cast it, you always want to think to yourself, oh, if only I kept it for 6 mana to get 4 instead. Whereas Sapperling Swarm is always relevant. It is a card that you just keep casting, so it never costs you a card to do that. And it is good both early game, but it is really, really good late game when you have tons of creatures. So absolutely, absolutely recommend that. One more token producer that I thought of that is rather fun is Burn Down the House. I didn't really include a lot of red tokens because I couldn't find many that I really liked, but Burn Down the House is definitely something I want you to consider because of its utility. Burn Down the House is either a board clear across the board of dealing 5 damage to everything, or it is creating 5 1/1 devils. And devils, when they die, they will deal 1 damage. I didn't even realize it gives them haste. Didn't even realize that. What a fun card. Burn Down the House is a fantastic card. And I find that it works really well in this deck, both as a token producer, which you can primarily think of it as, but there's going to be boards where Ulasht is big enough that you can cast this, wipe the board, and then get ahead, get ahead with your big Hydra and whatever creatures remain on your side of the field. There's definitely some combinations of growing your Sapperlings or other creatures past the point of 5, which is easier to do than you'd think. Cast this, wipe the rest of the board, and attack your opponents. I think this is a fun card that you can definitely play with little problems. And my goodness, I can't believe someone would want this in black and white. It is such a fun card with red, with all these colors. Anyways, so I have 4 other cards I wanted to suggest, and these cards are more like general support cards that I think could benefit your deck because the main game plan of creating a bunch of tokens, I want you to be able to take advantage of it just a little more in a few different directions besides just having, a million tokens and attacking. I say that, but at least one of them is still that, so maybe not so much. But the first one is Blade of the Blood Chief. Definitely suggest this in most aristocrat decks or most token decks, But the really fun thing, so Blade of the Blood Chief, when a creature dies, you get a +1/+1 counter on a equipped creature. Ignore the text about vampires, you don't play vampires. But as you might have guessed, the fun of this is to equip it to Ulasht, right? Pay 1 mana, sacrifice create a Saproling, and then when that Saproling dies, it basically reconnects to Ulasht because a creature dies, so Ulasht gets a +1/+1 counter, which I think is really, really fun. It also does the same thing for opposing 1/1 creatures because you pay 1 mana, you remove a counter, you destroy a a 1/1 creature or an X1 creature, and then a creature dies. So Blade of the Blood Chief gives that +1/+1 counter back to Ulasht. That by itself, I think, is really good. I think if you can get Ulasht out early with only like a few counters, you're willing to do so if you have Blade of the Blood Chief out. Because the second you equip Blade of the Blood Chief, the fact that Ulasht hasn't come out really big is not really a problem anymore because it's going to grow incredibly fast. But the other thing is this card gets super, super silly once you incorporate any of the other good cards in your deck. If you include any of the mana doublers, then you're actually positive on this interaction because every time you create a +1/+1, create a 1/1 or deal 1 damage, you will then get 2 +1/+1 counters when that creature dies onto Ulasht, and you are getting ahead. Obviously, with the token doublers as well, it works in the same way, where you are taking 1 counter and making 2 creatures, and when those creatures die, you put 2 counters onto Ulasht. So really, really good in those ways. Obviously, fantastic with Ashnod's Altar, because that kind of lets you go infinite, right? You create a Saproling, you sacrifice the Saproling for 2 mana, the +1/+1 counter returns, and then you use 1 of that 2 mana to continue the cycle. So you will have infinite colorless mana, and you will also have infinite dying triggers, or if you have a +1/+1 counter doubler, you have infinite +1/+1 counters. There's just so much you can do with that setup that is really, really easy to put together, and each individual card is already really, really good in your deck. So absolutely give the Hydra a sword. I think that's what we want to do. Then we have 2 other cards. Another card I've recently suggested, I think is also very, very good, Evolutionary Leap. Evolutionary Leap turns your tokens into tutor effects. Well, once again, not tutor effects, but pretty close. It selectively turns, when you sacrifice one of your creatures, it turns them into the next creature in your deck into your hand. So this has a lot of gameplay in your deck, where not only can you hold it, you can play this and use it proactively and just turn Saprolings into creatures, where the creatures are often much better than the Saprolings. It also is a very good reactive spell, so that once again, when you are feeling that you have a lot of green mana and your head, and maybe you have Fresh Meat or Saproling, Sproutstorm in hand, Evolutionary Leap stands there and says, okay, just hold up mana. And if there's a board clear or something else that you're not too happy with, spend all of your mana to get to sacrifice as many creatures as you can and get, like, you're drawing a card every time you do. As I said before in a previous video, this card does not work at sorcery speed. It works at instant speed, and that is rare for an effect like this these days. So you should absolutely take advantage of it and put it in the deck. Last 2 things I want to add. Battle Hymn. I think Battle Hymn is just a fun card. It does what it says on the tin, where it makes a bunch of red mana for each creature you control. I think, like, if you were considering playing Metamorphos or considering playing anything else, this is a really fun way to make tons and tons of mana and get ahead on that turn to be able to play some really big creatures. Big fan of that. And then finally, just as an alternative kind of win condition, Overwhelming Stampede gives you something to do with all of your tokens that aren't particularly good attackers. You basically do the thing you always do, where you play Ushalt. Let's say you have 10 tokens. So Ushalt comes with about, let's just say they're all mono green. So Ushalt's a 10/10. You then use, if you have the mana, which you could have 9 mana for this, you play Overwhelming Stampede. This gives all of your tokens +10/+10. You now have 10 11/11s, which is what, 100 and I hate multiplying by 11. It is 110 damage. Multiplying by 10. That's really easy. It is 110 damage that you can spread around amongst your opponents. It has trample, so it goes through. It just functions as a really clean finisher for the deck without having to worry too much about board states or the like. Fantastic card. Very, very cheap. Absolutely recommend that you grab something like this. All right. I hope I hope that this deck assist was helpful to you. There's still a lot I could really talk about, especially when we think about the idea of whether or not, you want different versions of the deck and different power levels. But almost all of my suggestions were just to generally make the deck a little more consistent, fix the mana a little bit, and take out a few superfluous cards, and try to make it more on theme and try to make it a little more successful. If you're worried about power level, something like Blade of the Blood Chief, which is I think by far one of the strongest cards I suggested, or Gamble, which is the tutor that grabs anything, you can just go ahead and not play them. But I don't think those cards make the deck too oppressive. I think this deck could like settle very nicely at a, nice middle power level where you're going to have fun games with your friends and do cool things. I don't think Ulasht is ever going to be something that is, incredibly oppressively powerful. So it's more about just finding a nice center that you feel that the deck is doing what you want without, beating your friends every week. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck or another draft of any deck, there is a link in the video description below for you to send that deck list to. And if you would like to skip the lineup, because the lineup can be rather long, there is a list right there. Sorry, a link right there. And if you do so, your deck will be the next deck I look at. And as always, if you could like, comment, subscribe, ring bells, notifications, all that kind of stuff, I would be very grateful. It is helpful to the channel, and I'm very appreciative of any help of getting our channel going. I like Ulasht. I'm sure someone's going to say, I feel like I've been mispronouncing it the whole time, but I'm just going to go ahead and let it go. I think this is a really fun creature, and I think this is a really good build to use it in. There's a lot of really fun cards in here that work really well with the Hydra Hellion, and I'm really interested to see the evolution of a deck like this. Yeah, I would really like to see another draft. I think there's a lot here that I really like that I just haven't been able to touch on because we're more working on the first steps. All right, good luck.